Hi, I'm Ryan from Waiting 9 Productions, and I'm here with Dusty from Vision Video. How you doing, Dusty?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
So how did you become interested in goth and punk music, and what are some of your big influences?
So my interest in that realm of music kind of came about in the early 2000s. You know, I was a teenager. I was living in a very rural area in Georgia. And I remember like hearing some songs from bands like Joy Division and Bauhaus, and it really just struck me as like so intensely different. And this is like a time where the internet wasn't fully fleshed out, and we had very limited access to the internet because we were in rural Georgia, so it was like very slow. So you couldn't just like hop online and look up stuff. It was a very different time. And the information about those kinds of bands just wasn't as like readily available. So it felt very sort of precious and weird and bizarre. And I liked that because I lived in this very like homogenous rural agrarian society in rural Georgia. So, you know, I just something about the sound of those bands really resonated with me, because I felt very isolated being kind of a weird kid, you know, that was not into the normal purview of like what teenage boys should be into. I just fell in love with it. And, you know, all throughout my adult life, like really the past 20 years, you know, I've never kind of fallen away from that music. It's always been, you know, I listen to a lot of different kinds of music, but that's always been my like primary interest is that sort of like late 70s into the mid 80s era of just experimentation, moving away from punk rock. It was always just one of those things that just fascinated me, and it was like, yeah, like that music is for me, for sure.
Did you grow up with the guys in your band?
No, we all met kind of in an organic, very Athens, Georgia kind of way. Like our drummer Jason and I met working at a music venue. We basically, I was bartending and he was a bar back, and he saw that I was like writing music, so he plays in another band called She He He, which is a punk band. And he was like, "Why don't you come over someday and I'll put some drums behind this?" And then met, you know, Dan he's our original writing bassist. He basically asked to kind of join in with the band because we had been posting stuff, and he really liked, you know, what he was hearing. And then Emily was a mutual friend of another friend in the service industry, and we were looking for a keyboard player. So it all kind of just, you know, like coalesced around the service industry of Athens.
Oh, that's awesome. What was the inspiration behind your new album title, Haunted Hours, and how is it different from your debut album, Inked in Red?
Yeah, so Haunted Hours is more of a kind of exploration of mortality in general, whereas Inked in Red was kind of me processing the war and some, you know, political things. Haunted Hours was a very like personal, intense deep dive into my sort of musings or whatever on mortality and the end of life. You know, I went through a really tough time with COVID, being a paramedic, and you know, even just normal stuff. You know, it's like there's this whole thing in the fire department or the EMS world, where they call certain people black clouds. It's like it's a highly superstitious thing, but there's something to it. Whenever I get on an ambulance, it's going to be an intense day. And I just, you know, I needed to kind of explore and release some of that, you know, traumatic memory that was living very much so inside of my head, and that I didn't really feel like, I mean, like you can do therapy, you can talk about things, but I think that art for me is like the best way of sort of exercising things that need to get out. Yeah, so Haunted Hours is all about that, whereas Inked in Red is a little more like politically oriented, although I guess, you know, in some ways Haunted Hours is too. It's just it feels like they're aimed at different times in my life, whereas Inked in Red was like more at the war, and Haunted Hours was definitely more COVID and the fire department, stuff like that. Yeah.
Are you the main lyric writer in the band?
Yes. Yeah, I pretty much write most of the lyrics. Emily will help me sometimes, but the preponderance of it is me.
And what about songwriting? Do you all take a crack at that?
So songwriting for us is pretty straightforward. I kind of write guitar riffs, and I come up with a general sense of melody for vocals and whatnot. And then I sort of present it to the band, and we kind of just get together in a room and sort of vamp on it until everybody has parts. And we just play it over and over and over and over again until we find like everybody has found their part with it is complete.
Oh, awesome. Can you walk us through the process of writing A Beautiful Day to Die, and what's the inspiration behind the lyrics?
Yeah, Beautiful Day to Die is a song that I wrote. There was this like really intense period of time when I was working as a firefighter and paramedic in Atlanta, where I was just around a lot of mortality and end-of-life situations. And when you're around that a lot, it gets really difficult to kind of process on a regular basis, because you sort of go through these crazy traumatic things every day, and then you go home and you're just sort of like there sitting at your house, and it's very surreal, and it can have really intense effects on your mental health. So I was trying to like think of it in a different way and like sort of flip the script on mortality. I wanted to write something that celebrated mortality instead of feared it or reviled it. Like, I think, it's a privilege that we get to live hopefully long, healthy lives. And one day it will be, your day to die. And that's not something to fear because it's inevitable. It's something to just like appreciate and value. So I kind of wanted to just write this like very Smiths-esque, kind of cheery song, but about a very intense subject matter.
So you were telling me that you left being a paramedic to continue on the band and take it full time.
Yeah.
How has that been?
It's been amazing. I mean, it's scary, especially at first. Like I left in June of last year, so it was like one of those situations where I saw the writing on the wall. It was like, all right, this is growing to a level where I'm pretty sure we can do this full time, but there's no certainty and there's no guarantees, and you just, it's all like there's so many aspects that you can't control, and that for me is like terrifying, because I come from the military and the fire department, where it's all about mitigating chaos and controlling parameters that you can to like save lives or accomplish missions or whatever. So it was a really bizarre experience moving from government work, where I am like just a cog in the machine, to like manifesting everything for ourselves. And that was a bit intense, but the past year has been really good to us, and I have no doubts that it was the right decision. I think I was also kind of at a point where I kind of needed to step away from really traumatic things, because I was just getting very, like, I don't know, not to say calloused, because I still had empathy for my patients, and I did a really good job. I was a great paramedic, but it was just getting hard to, like, if you hear like a friend complaining about a bad day or something, I don't know, just be like, okay, and it would just get difficult to feel empathy for like very normal problems, even my own problems, and I didn't like that. I was like, oh, I should, like, if something makes you upset, you can't control the way you feel, and human emotions are complex, and they shouldn't be diminished just because other bad things happen. Yeah. So I kind of needed the time to move on anyway, and I think the universe was just telling me, it's like, do this now.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your experience in Afghanistan and how that influenced your songwriting?
Yeah, so I was, in the Army for 15 years. I was enlisted before I became an officer, went over to the officer side and deployed with, 30, mostly kids, to Afghanistan. The average age of my platoon was like 22, I believe. So it was a very young group of guys. We were there in the last combat deployment of Afghanistan, and basically, my job there was to sort of train the Afghan National Police and the Army so that we could transition away and just provide security during the last election where Hamid Karzai was being replaced as the president. But as far as the effect on my music writing, our first record, Inked in Red, it was kind of a lot to do with that process. It was a lot of me kind of figuring out how to deal with sort of the memories of it. It wasn't all that traumatic in a way, but it was more just like the insane amount of stress that I never really processed and never put down. And just being in a war zone and not agreeing with the reasons why we were there, it just has a heavy burden on you. And Yeah, I wrote a lot of the songs about war, or about the effects of war, both on society and individuals. But like while I was there, I was actually like playing a lot of guitar in my free time. I was kind of like, there was like on the FOB, the forward operating base that we were on, there was this like really old beat up acoustic guitar, and I would just like kind of play it all the time when we would be off missions. So it kind of lit that spark for me to want to write music and perform music again.
How long were you over there for?
Just about 9 months.
What are some of the challenges you face while recording Haunted Hours?
Yeah, it was a pretty smoothly done record. I think the biggest thing that was difficult at that time was like, it's just kind of the story of any band that isn't full-time yet. Because at that time we had not, gone into this professionally full-time. The hardest part was just getting everybody together to write parts and get, everything really smoothed out. So we did a lot of reconfiguring and rewriting and kind of editing things on the fly in the studio, which I think worked in a really interesting way. We came up with some really amazing stuff that was just different than maybe what we'd normally do. And I think the record ended up being a little bit more like avant-garde and just stranger. It's a little less like pop-oriented like the first record. It's got a lot of hooks, and it's this one was just a little weirder, but I liked it. It has more texture, it was just like just trying to get the time where you can get 4 people all together to write songs is difficult, and sometimes you end up kind of just writing a little bit in the studio as you're recording. But I guess at the end of the day, it was a challenge, but it was something that I think benefited the record, in an interesting way, because everybody was just sort of going, oh, well, I'm not really sure exactly what I want to do here. And it's like, well, just go with something. And if you like it, then great. And we'll keep rolling with that. And if you don't, then we'll reconfigure. So nobody had like what's called demo-itis, where you're like, you play a song and you record a demo, and then it's like, okay, that's the way it's supposed to sound. It was just whatever sounds best, which is cool.
Where did you guys record it?
So our touring bassist right now is this guy named Tom Ashton. Our writing bassist can't really tour because he still works as a professor at the University of Georgia, which is Dan Geller. But Tom Ashton is the producer and engineer of our record. So Tom runs a place in Georgia called Subvon Studios. Tom's like great. He's a former member of like some really amazing sort of 80s goth bands. His big band was he played guitar for the March Violets, but he was also like one of the very first members of the Sisters of Mercy for a very little time. He played with like Clan of Zymox, Dance Society, so he's really accomplished musician. So we recorded both records with him, and it was just like amazing. It's a smaller production studio, but because of that, it's like we had more time with it, and there was no rush. It was just sort of an open-ended experience. It was like, when it's done, and it's not like, okay, we're booking you for X days, which is nice, because we're about to go to a big studio to record some new music, and it's like we have 5 days, and like that's it. Yeah. And or you pay a lot of money to get more days, and that's, it's just tough. So it was just a total pleasure, and I think that his understanding of like our sound and what we do really well came out completely, and that I think that made like I told him when we first went in the studio, I was like, I want this to sound like it was produced in 1984, and he's like, okay, cool, we got it. So
did you guys record during COVID?
We did a little bit right before COVID, and then we did a couple tracks sort of semi-hybrid remotely that we added to the record. The second record came out just last year, so it was sort of post-vaccine, so it was a little bit of a different experience at that point.
What's your favorite song off the record?
From Haunted Hours? My favorite song off Haunted Hours is probably, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite, because it's like we really don't play it live, because it's like when you go on a 30-day tour and you play something that's very emotionally intense, you can't really do that. But we have this song called "Unwanted Faces," and I think it's the best song on the record. It's just a really intense one. That's like, it's one of those songs that I wrote about like having flashbacks of like really traumatic things, and it's just very. But I love the there's this really creepy groove. The bass line does some really interesting things that are very atypical, and it crescendos in a really cool way. So that's probably my favorite, but it's it's kind of a weird thing to favorite.
How has the Athens music scene influenced your music?
Athens is very integral to like everything that we do. Athens is a huge music scene that's very storied from, very far back. Like, it started with like blues, like a lot of like really rich African-American music and cultural history. But then, it's most, I guess, notable for like the late 70s, early 80s with the kind of like college radio rock experience of like B-52s and REM and Pylon and all these like really iconic like kind of post-punk bands from that time. There's a huge infrastructure of music in Athens. There's a bunch of music shops, there's record stores, but then there's most importantly a lot of really great venues. So that had a big impact on the way the whole thing worked for us, because you have 1,000 cap rooms, but then you also have 100 cap rooms where you get to learn stagecraft and how to do all this stuff. Because, you can be the best musician in the world, but if you don't know how to, like, get on a stage and get everything prepped and do a sound check and go through the steps of doing a good show, then it's, you're not going to do well going on a 30-day tour or whatever. So it's just it's a great incubator. Historically, Athens was very cheap. It's not anymore because it's hyper gentrified, but it's still reasonable, and it's just a cool town. Like I mentioned, there's like the service industry. A lot of service industry people are musicians or artists there, and it just breeds these really cool, weird things, and I love it there. It's an amazing city.
That's great. Now, you were mentioning how you came up with the name Vision Video. Would you like to?
Yeah. So Vision Video basically was the name of this video store that was local to Athens. It was kind of like the local punk rock Blockbuster, basically.
Oh, cool.
It was 3 or 4 different locations in the Athens area, and it was mostly run by like college students from UGA, and it was just a cool place. Like it was you'd go in there and they would remember you, and they'd have like flyers up for bands, and they had all the like weird cult movies and stuff, all the like weird shitty horror movies that I love.
Yeah.
It was just cool. Like, and they made it really long into the sort of streaming era. They made it till about 2016, I think.
So they did close down.
Yeah, they closed down, and that's why we kind of took the name, because I think there's something about like video stores that I really miss. It's sort of the deliberate nature.
Yeah.
Like now we have streaming stuff, which is cool. You can hit a button and watch whatever, but it's all like curated by algorithms. It's like, oh, we think you should watch this, and it's, I don't know, I miss the human element where you walk in and there's some like punk rock girl who's like, oh, you watched Evil Dead 2, you should watch Dead Alive, like you'll love this.
Yeah, exactly.
That human stuff is like, we're losing that in society, and I think for me, like taking on that name in spirit, at least, it was just a cool way to like keep something going that I really love, and I think that we should get back to. Actually, this store,
that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Videodrome is where this shirt comes from. They are the last video store in Atlanta, which is very near Athens.
They still have DVDs.
Yep, you can rent like every, so shout out to Videodrome.
Wow, amazing.
And it's awesome, and they do really well. And I'm like, I bet if you could open another one in Athens, it probably would do pretty well, because I would be there all the time. Like, I'm so tired of like just terrible movies from Netflix. Like I want to go and like find the weird thing that I want to watch, and
yeah, it's like the thrill of the hunt too. You go there,
yeah.
like, what am I gonna get?
Yeah.
What am I gonna leave here with?
Yeah.
Can you share any tips or advice to any like upcoming musicians on how they can get some, shows, labels, recording studios?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is just to be consistent. Just put yourself out there. If you really want to not even do music as a career, but just like get your music out there. The first step is literally put it out, like get it out there. If you don't have the courage to put your music out there, nobody's ever going to hear it. So you could be sitting on some of the best songs ever, but until it gets out there, you won't know. And so just getting stuff out there is the biggest part. But then working really hard to promote your stuff online. Like, social media sucks and it's really obnoxious. And these companies like don't care about you, and they don't care about your project, and they are only really trying to get you to pay for like ad money. But you can use these tools like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all this just crap to, as long as you can tell stories and be consistent and keep putting stuff out. And whatever, doesn't work, learn from that and change it. And maybe when you see something that does work and hits off a little bit, go for that. Keep doing that. And just don't give up. Like, we're just now at a point where I feel stable financially doing this. And it's not about money, but you got to pay your bills, and you've got to be a human being, But I think that you just have to kind of find, you have to just continuously fall in love with it and be willing to work really hard. And maybe the biggest thing is get ready to fail a whole bunch. I've been told no 1,000 times or more with this project. I've been told that my music is terrible and that yada yada, like every disparaging thing under the sun, and I don't care, because it's not for that person, it's for me and the people that it does resonate with. And if you believe in what you're doing, I think eventually it will find its audience, but you have to do the due diligence to get it to them.
All right, well, Dusty, thanks for the interview. Check out Dusty's band, Vision Video. They're playing tonight at the Chance. Good luck at your show and the rest of your tour.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you.